There comes a moment, often unannounced, when a person realizes that time has been passing without their consent. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, quietly. Years accumulate, habits settle, certain compromises become routine. And one day, almost without warning, a question arises, not shouted, but calmly observed. Is this the measure of which I am capable? The Stoics understood this moment well. They did not dramatize it, nor did they rush to console it. They regarded it as a sign of awakening, the first evidence that a person has begun to take themselves seriously. Epictetus framed it with characteristic restraint. How long will you postpone thinking yourself worthy of the best you are capable of? Not the best the world will give you, not the best circumstances might allow, but the best that lies within your own command. That distinction is essential. Stoicism is not concerned with ambition in the modern sense. It is concerned with authority, inner authority, the kind that does not depend on recognition, fortune, or favorable conditions. And authority begins with attention. Before anything can be governed, a household, a profession, a life, the mind itself must be examined. Left unattended, it becomes impressionable, reactive, indulgent. Not because it is weak, but because it is human. Marcus Aurelius knew this intimately. Despite ruling an empire, commanding armies, and carrying responsibilities few could imagine, his most persistent concern was not external order, but internal discipline. His private writings, later known as Meditations, were never intended for public consumption. They were reminders, corrections, quiet recalibrations. He wrote not to impress, but to remember. Remember what sort of being he wished to be. Remember what was within his power and what was not. Remember that clarity does not arise spontaneously, it is cultivated. This habit of writing is among the most underestimated disciplines a person can adopt.
Writing is not expression, it is confrontation. When thoughts remain internal, they enjoy a certain immunity. They exaggerate freely, they evade scrutiny, they adopt urgency without evidence. Placed on the page, they must answer for themselves. Seneca advised this practice with remarkable consistency. In his letters, he encouraged the daily examination of one's conduct, not with severity, but with seriousness. The goal was not guilt, but lucidity. What did I do well today? Where did I act beneath my own standards? Which impulses governed me, and which did I govern? This is not introspection for comfort. It is introspection for command. The page becomes a private court in which one is both witness and judge, not to punish, but to restore order. It is worth noting that some of the most consequential decisions in modern history were made in precisely this manner. Under extraordinary pressure, leaders who resisted impulsive reaction often did so by retreating, briefly, into thought made tangible. Notes, diagrams, drafts, possibilities weighed with patience rather than haste. Paper does not provoke. It does not interrupt. It allows complexity to unfold without demand for immediacy. Those who work things out on the page spare others the burden of their confusion. If one were to adopt only a single habit, modest in appearance, formidable in effect, this would be sufficient. Take the time to think clearly, and do so in writing. The mind, relieved of carrying everything alone, becomes more precise. Those around you feel the difference. Your future self benefits most of all. From this foundation follows the second discipline, one that begins before the day makes its first demand.
rising early. Not as an act of severity, nor as a gesture of moral superiority, but as a declaration of intention. Marcus Aurelius addressed this struggle directly. He acknowledged the warmth of the bed, the appeal of postponement, the rationalizations that arise at dawn, and yet he reminded himself that he was not born merely for comfort, but for function. To rise is to participate, to delay is to drift. The early hours possess a particular quality. They are unclaimed, uncontaminated, free from the expectations of others. Before correspondence arrives, before obligations assemble, before the noise of the world establishes its rhythm. In this interval, one is most oneself. Many of history's most disciplined minds guarded these hours with almost reverent seriousness. They understood that clarity is fragile and must be protected from intrusion. It is not that rising early makes one virtuous. It is that it makes one available to thought, to reflection, to work that requires undivided attention. Of course, it is not easy, but difficulty, to the Stoic, is not a deterrent, it is a signal. Seneca remarked that the body must occasionally be challenged, lest it become insubordinate to the mind. Comfort, when habitual, develops demands of its own, which brings us naturally to another Stoic discipline, the deliberate encounter with difficulty. Not recklessness, not masochism, but voluntary resistance. The Stoics sought hardship in measured doses, not to glorify suffering, but to prevent dependence, cold, hunger, physical exertion, constraint. These experiences remind the individual that they are capable of enduring more than preference would suggest. Epictetus, who endured circumstances far harsher than most, understood that resilience is not theoretical, it is embodied. When one has faced discomfort by choice, misfortune loses much of its threat. There is a quiet confidence that arises, not from triumph, but from familiarity with effort. Modern life, by contrast, is designed to remove friction. Convenience is abundant. Resistance is optional. Yet anxiety proliferates. The Stoics would recognize the pattern immediately. A life without challenge does not produce peace. It produces fragility.
To counter this, they recommended not constant struggle, but periodic testing. A challenge that demands preparation, a task that stretches capacity, an undertaking that cannot be completed without discipline. Such efforts clarify character. They reveal not only what one can do, but how one responds when momentum falters. This knowledge is invaluable. It carries into every domain: intellectual, professional, relational. One who knows they can endure difficulty is not easily destabilized. Equally underestimated is the Stoic emphasis on movement, particularly walking. Seneca wrote that the mind benefits from being set in motion. Walking, he believed, allowed thought to breathe. Nietzsche would later echo this conviction, insisting that only ideas conceived while walking were worthy of consideration. Movement restores proportion. Problems that appear immense when seated often diminish when carried into open air. Perspective shifts. Tension releases. Thought becomes less circular, more exploratory. Walking is not exercise alone. It is regulation. It draws the mind out of abstraction and back into relation with the world as it is. In this simplicity lies a certain elegance. Another Stoic principle, often overlooked because of its modesty, is incremental improvement. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, taught that well-being is achieved by small advances, and yet is no small achievement. The Stoics distrusted dramatic transformation. They preferred consistency. One considered improvement per day, one habit refined, one reaction corrected. These changes do not announce themselves. They accumulate. Over time, they shape temperament. Over time, they become character.
and character, in Stoic thought, was not private. Marcus Aurelius returned repeatedly to the notion of the common good. A life lived well was one that benefited others, not through grand gestures, but through reliability, fairness, and restraint. Stoicism was never an excuse for detachment. It was a framework for contribution. To live well was to serve well. Finally, there is the discipline that gives weight to all others, the remembrance of mortality. Memento mori. Remember that life is finite. This was not intended to darken the spirit. It was meant to focus it. Seneca observed that people guard their possessions with vigilance, yet treat their time with carelessness, as though it were inexhaustible. It is not. Each day expended is irretrievable. Marcus Aurelius wrote with striking clarity, "You may leave life at any moment. Let this truth determine what you do, say, and think." This awareness does not diminish life, it intensifies it. It clarifies priorities, it sharpens affection, it reduces triviality. One becomes less tolerant of waste, of time, of energy, of attention. And in this seriousness, paradoxically, one finds freedom. This is only the beginning. One of the more subtle illusions of modern life is the belief that understanding precedes action. That once we have read enough, reflected enough, or waited long enough, clarity will arrive, and with it, the confidence to act decisively. The Stoics were deeply skeptical of this notion. They observed that clarity is rarely a prerequisite. It is far more often a consequence. Epictetus warned that people are not undone by ignorance, but by delay, by the quiet habit of postponing the alignment of their conduct with principles they already recognize as sound. In Stoic thought, philosophy was not a retreat into abstraction, it was a preparation for living. And living, by its nature, does not wait. This is why the Stoics placed such emphasis on the management of impressions, the first interpretations the mind assigns to events. Before reason has time to intervene, the mind is quick to label. A remark becomes an insult. A setback becomes a catastrophe. A delay becomes an injustice. Yet Epictetus insisted that events themselves are indifferent. It is our judgments that transform them into sources of disturbance. This does not imply emotional indifference. It implies discernment. The Stoic does not deny feeling. They interrogate it. Is this reaction proportional? Is it useful? Is it consistent with the character I am attempting to cultivate? Between stimulus and response lies a moment of sovereignty. The Stoics trained this moment deliberately. In doing so, they achieved a form of freedom that is often misunderstood. Not freedom from difficulty, but freedom within it. Another discipline closely related to this practice is restraint. Seneca frequently counseled periods of deliberate simplicity. He would eat plainly, dress modestly, and temporarily remove comforts from his life. Not because such things were harmful, but because dependence upon them was. Attachment, he believed, was the true source of anxiety. When comfort becomes expectation, its absence becomes distress. By periodically choosing less, one weakens fear. This principle extends far beyond material simplicity. It applies equally to attention, stimulation, and approval. The modern world offers a constant invitation to distraction, to be informed about everything, to react to everyone, to participate in every controversy. The Stoics would regard this as a profound misuse of attention. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself repeatedly that most things do not deserve the importance we assign to them. Our energy is finite. To squander it on the trivial is a form of self-neglect. Attention, to the Stoic, was sacred. Where attention goes, character follows. This understanding reframes discipline entirely. Discipline is not punishment, it is protection. It protects time from being consumed by noise. It protects values from erosion by convenience. It protects the mind from fragmentation. Epictetus articulated this with austere clarity. Freedom is not found in getting what one desires, but in desiring what accords with reason. This is not resignation,
It is refinement. Desire, when unexamined, becomes tyrannical. When educated, it becomes an ally. From this perspective, success takes on a different meaning. Success is not accumulation, it is coherence. Coherence between belief and behavior, between aspiration and action, between inner conviction and outward conduct. Many people experience a quiet dissonance here. They admire certain virtues, integrity, courage, moderation, yet permit their daily habits to drift in opposing directions. Stoicism does not condemn this inconsistency, it exposes it. Marcus Aurelius wrote with remarkable candor about his own shortcomings. His journal is not a celebration of mastery, but a record of vigilance. Philosophy, for the Stoic, was not something one completed, it was something one returned to. Another practice integral to this vigilance is the rehearsal of adversity. Seneca advised his readers to imagine loss, not to indulge in pessimism, but to reduce shock, to remove the illusion that anything external is guaranteed. What if this does not endure? What if fortune changes? What if the outcome disappoints? By contemplating these possibilities calmly, one reduces their power. Most suffering arises not from hardship itself, but from the belief that hardship was unexpected. The Stoics were never surprised. This preparedness produces a form of gratitude that is neither sentimental nor naive. When one recognizes that everything is provisional, appreciation deepens. Success is enjoyed without arrogance. Possession is held without clinging. Relationships are valued without illusion. This outlook is particularly vital in cultures that tie identity tightly to achievement. When worth is conflated with outcome, failure becomes existential. Stoicism offers a corrective. Your worth resides in your intention and effort, not in results, which remain subject to forces beyond your command. Epictetus was unequivocal on this point. Focus on what belongs to you, your judgments, your choices, your character. Everything else is circumstance. This does not breed passivity. It fosters resilience. Resilience, as the Stoics understood it, is not defiance. It is steadiness. The ability to remain composed when events fluctuate, to continue acting honorably when recognition is absent, to endure discomfort without bitterness. Such steadiness is quiet, and therefore often overlooked, yet it is among the rarest forms of strength. The Stoics extended this composure into the realm of human relationships. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself repeatedly that other people act according to their understanding. When they err, it is not personal, it is human. This insight does not excuse harm, it tempers reaction. Resentment, the Stoics observed, is a heavy burden. It binds one to the past and relinquishes control of the present. Forgiveness, in Stoic thought, was not an act of generosity toward others, it was an act of self-preservation. To release resentment is to reclaim agency. As these practices accumulate, a pattern becomes apparent. Stoicism is not concerned with emotional suppression, it is concerned with emotional governance. It teaches one to experience feeling without being ruled by it, to acknowledge disturbance without surrendering judgment. And in this governance, something remarkable occurs. Life becomes less chaotic, not because events improve,
but because one's internal order strengthens. This order is not rigid, it is adaptive. It allows for grief without collapse, for joy without dependency, for ambition without desperation. And perhaps most importantly, it restores proportion. One begins to see oneself accurately, neither inflated nor diminished. Which leads to one of the most demanding Stoic virtues, humility. Not self-effacement, but precision. Epictetus warned that confidence becomes arrogance the moment it ceases to be examined. The Stoic remains a student, regardless of experience. This humility protects against despair as well. When one accepts imperfection as inherent, progress becomes sustainable. Another virtue cultivated through Stoic practice is gratitude, not as a fleeting emotion, but as a disciplined perspective. Marcus Aurelius often cataloged the influences that shaped him: teachers, ancestors, chance, circumstance. He understood that no life is self-constructed. Gratitude dissolves entitlement. It reframes success as stewardship rather than possession, failure as instruction rather than indictment. This perspective does not weaken ambition, it ennobles it. One strives not to dominate, but to contribute. As these habits intertwine, restraint, attention, humility, gratitude, a coherent disposition emerges. A person less reactive, more deliberate, increasingly difficult to unsettle. This is not withdrawal from life. It is engagement on terms dictated by reason rather than impulse. And it prepares one for the final, most sobering Stoic discipline: the contemplation of mortality. The Stoics approached mortality with neither morbidity nor denial. They regarded it as a fact, among the most important facts a person could keep within view, not as a threat, as a measure. Memento mori was not a fixation on death. It was a discipline of perspective, a means of correcting proportion in a world that constantly exaggerates the trivial and obscures the essential. Marcus Aurelius returned to this contemplation with striking regularity, not because he was pessimistic, but because he was precise. He understood that time, once past, does not negotiate its return. What has gone is gone. What remains is limited. What matters must be chosen deliberately. This awareness produces a particular seriousness, not severity, but gravity. A refusal to waste attention on what cannot justify its claim upon one's finite life. Seneca observed that people behave as though they possess an infinite reserve of time. They postpone courage, they delay honesty, they defer the life they intend to live. Stoicism interrupts this illusion. When you remember that life is not guaranteed, postponement loses its appeal. You begin to ask different questions. Is this worthy of my time? Is this consistent with my values? If this were repeated every day, would it constitute a life I respect? These questions are not oppressive. They are clarifying. They strip away excess. They refine intention. They return the individual to what lies within their responsibility. One of the most profound consequences of this clarity is restraint in conflict. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself of how brief human life is, and how absurd it is to spend it consumed by resentment, rivalry, or wounded pride. In the presence of mortality, trivial disputes lose urgency. This does not make the Stoic indifferent to justice. It makes them selective. Not every provocation requires engagement. Not every disagreement merits escalation. Not every injury deserves to define one's interior life. Such restraint is often mistaken for passivity. It is not. It is discipline. The discipline to choose peace without surrendering principle. Another habit shaped by this awareness is patience.
Seneca cautioned against haste, particularly the haste to see results. He understood that meaningful change unfolds gradually, often invisibly. Impatience, in Stoic thought, was not energy. It was a form of distrust, a refusal to accept the tempo of reality. In an age that prizes immediacy, patience becomes a rare form of confidence. Confidence that effort accumulates, that progress need not announce itself, that character, once formed, outlasts circumstance. This long view fundamentally alters how one approaches ambition. Ambition, disciplined by Stoicism, is neither frantic nor expansive. It is directed. The Stoic does not ask, "How can I achieve more?" They ask, "What is worth achieving?" This question is quietly radical. It challenges assumptions inherited rather than examined. It demands alignment between aspiration and virtue. Marcus Aurelius was acutely aware of how power distorts perspective. His writings return repeatedly to the necessity of self-scrutiny, particularly when circumstances are favorable. Success, he believed, tests character more severely than hardship. Comfort tempts complacency. Authority invites arrogance. Security dulls vigilance. Stoicism insists that virtue must be maintained most carefully when it seems least threatened. Another deeply Stoic habit, often overlooked, is the cultivation of silence. Not withdrawal, not secrecy, but discretion. The Stoics valued speech that served purpose and truth. They were suspicious of speech motivated by ego, impatience, or the desire to dominate. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to speak only when necessary, and then with clarity and restraint. In a world saturated with opinion, silence becomes a form of authority. One who speaks less is often heard more. This restraint extends inward as well. The Stoic learns to interrupt internal monologues that spiral into rumination or self-reproach. Not every thought deserves amplification. Discernment applies to the inner voice as much as the outer. This practice creates a calmer interior environment, one in which reason can operate without constant interference. From this calm emerges another Stoic virtue, compassion. Stoic compassion is not sentimental. It is grounded in understanding. Marcus Aurelius observed that people act according to their perceptions of good and bad. When they err, it is often due to ignorance rather than malice. This insight does not excuse wrongdoing. It contextualizes it. By recognizing shared fallibility, the Stoic avoids the corrosive effects of contempt. Contempt narrows vision. It hardens judgment. It diminishes the capacity for cooperation. Stoicism, by contrast, is fundamentally social. Human beings, Marcus Aurelius wrote, are made for one another. A good life is one that contributes to the common good, through fairness, reliability, and restraint. This emphasis on contribution corrects another modern misconception, that self-mastery is inherently self-centered. The Stoics believed the opposite. Only those who govern themselves well are capable of serving others well. Without self-command, good intentions dissolve into inconsistency. Service, then, becomes not an accessory to a well-lived life, but its expression. This service need not be dramatic. It manifests in trustworthiness, in patience with others' limitations, in the refusal to exploit advantage unfairly. Such qualities rarely attract attention, yet they shape environments profoundly. As these habits consolidate, attention, restraint, patience, compassion, a distinct orientation toward life emerges. One marked by steadiness rather than intensity, by depth rather than display, by dignity rather than dominance. The Stoics did not seek to stand out. They sought to stand firm. Firm in principle, firm in conduct, firm in adversity. This firmness does not isolate the individual. It anchors them. And anchoring, in turbulent times, is a form of leadership. Whether or not one holds formal authority, people are drawn to those who remain composed under pressure, who do not escalate chaos, who respond rather than react. The Stoics understood this influence. They regarded personal conduct as inherently instructive. You teach others how to treat you by how you treat yourself, and you teach others how to live by how you live. This understanding places responsibility squarely where it belongs, not on circumstances, but on choice. Which brings us, once again, to the present moment. Not as an abstract idea, but as a practical arena. Every day offers opportunities, often modest, occasionally demanding, to practice these disciplines. To pause before reacting, to choose effort over avoidance, to speak with restraint, to act with fairness, to remember what matters. Stoicism does not ask for perfection, it asks for seriousness. Seriousness about how you live, about how you treat others, about how you spend the finite substance of your time. And it is this seriousness, quiet, composed, and deliberate, that prepares one for the final synthesis. At a certain stage, philosophy ceases to be something one consults. It becomes something one inhabits, not as doctrine, not as identity, but as orientation. The Stoics never intended their teachings to be admired from a distance. They were not constructing systems to be debated indefinitely. They were offering a way of standing in the world, composed, deliberate, and awake. Marcus Aurelius did not aspire to be remembered as a philosopher. He aspired to be governed by reason, to act with justice, to meet circumstance without distortion. That aspiration, modest in language, demanding in practice, is the quiet center of Stoicism. It does not promise comfort. It does not guarantee success. It does not insulate one from loss. What it offers is integrity. Integrity in thought, integrity in action, integrity under pressure. And integrity, once established, becomes a form of freedom. Freedom from compulsive reaction, freedom from dependence on approval, freedom from the need to control what lies beyond one's reach. This freedom is subtle. It does not announce itself, but it is unmistakable to those who encounter it. It manifests as composure in difficulty, as clarity in complexity, as restraint when excess would be easier. The Stoics understood that such freedom is not granted. It is earned through repetition, vigilance, and humility. Every day presents a choice: to drift or to direct, to indulge or to govern, to react or to respond. The Stoic does not imagine that these choices disappear with progress. On the contrary, they become more refined. As one's circumstances improve, the tests often become quieter, and therefore more dangerous. Success introduces new temptations. Security invites complacency. Recognition distorts motivation. Marcus Aurelius was acutely aware of this. His writings return repeatedly to the need for self-examination precisely when life appears favorable. He reminded himself that fortune does not confer virtue, only conduct does. This distinction preserves clarity. It allows one to enjoy success without being defined by it, to endure failure without being diminished by it, to participate fully in life without being absorbed by it. The Stoics referred to this condition as tranquility, not the absence of disturbance, but the presence of order. Order within the mind, order within one's values, order within one's response to the world. This order does not isolate the individual, it integrates them. It makes relationships more stable, decisions more coherent, purpose more durable. And it orients life toward contribution rather than consumption.
Marcus Aurelius wrote that what is not good for the hive cannot be good for the bee. This was not sentiment, it was logic. Human beings are social by nature. To live well is to participate well. Stoicism rejects the fantasy of self-sufficiency. It insists on responsibility to others, to circumstance, to time itself. This responsibility is not oppressive, it is ennobling. It invites one to rise to the occasion of one's life, not by seeking distinction, but by cultivating reliability. To be someone whose word can be trusted, whose presence stabilizes rather than agitates, whose actions reflect considered judgment. Such qualities rarely attract attention, yet they are noticed in families, in institutions, in moments of uncertainty. They create confidence, not excitement, but confidence. And confidence, unlike enthusiasm, endures. The Stoics believed that life, when approached in this manner, acquires a particular density.
Each action carries weight. Each decision contributes to a coherent whole. This coherence does not require certainty. It requires commitment. Commitment to reason over impulse. Commitment to effort over ease. Commitment to what is right over what is convenient. These commitments are not made once. They are renewed, daily, quietly, without ceremony. This is why Stoicism resists simplification. It cannot be reduced to slogans without distortion. It demands engagement. It asks you to look at your life, not as you wish it were, but as it is. To accept what cannot be altered. To improve what can. To relinquish resentment over the rest. And above all, to remember the brevity of the opportunity. Memento mori, not as a warning, but as an invitation to seriousness, to presence, to precision. When one remembers that time is finite, distraction loses its charm. Procrastination loses its credibility. Triviality loses its hold. What remains is choice. Choice, repeated, becomes habit. Habit, sustained, becomes character. Character, over time, becomes a life. The Stoics believed that this life, examined, disciplined, and oriented toward the common good, was the highest achievement available to a human being. Not wealth, not reputation, not power, but dignity. Dignity in effort. Dignity in restraint. Dignity in acceptance. This dignity cannot be conferred. It cannot be revoked. It is cultivated. And it is available, at any stage, in any circumstance, to those willing to take responsibility for their own conduct. If you have remained with this reflection to its conclusion, it suggests not curiosity alone, but seriousness. A willingness to consider how you live and how you might live more deliberately. If this has proven valuable, you may choose to continue this inquiry. Not compulsively, not performatively, but thoughtfully. You might subscribe, not as a gesture of loyalty, but as a means of remaining in conversation with ideas that resist haste. You might share this with one person whose judgment you respect, not to persuade, but to invite reflection. And you might leave a considered comment, not an endorsement, but a contribution, a thought, a question, an observation. Such exchanges are the modern equivalent of philosophical correspondence, a tradition the Stoics themselves valued deeply. Whatever you choose, remember this: you need not master the world. You need only govern yourself. Everything else follows from that.